What's happening, Panda Nation? Peter Von Panda out here with my Maserati Ghibli. Let's take it for a ride. Know that I picked up a Ghibli here because I was looking for something with a little more space, and I really fell in love with Maseratis with my Grand Sport, so figured something a little more practical, a little more modern would probably be pretty nice. Now, let's take this one for a ride and check it out. All right, so the first thing is my little leather key cover. This is totally a remote entry car, so you don't even need it. Car is unlocked. You will notice that we have a frameless window here, and so the window goes down and up in order to seal. It's very much like that Infiniti M45. I really like it. It gives it a little sporty look, although it's kind of a little bit lost because most people won't even be able to tell. I think it's just one of those things. Now, this one is the SQ4, which means that it is the sport model with the higher output motor. So it's the 3-liter twin-turbo V6 with a little over 400 horsepower. And the Q4 means that it is actually 4-wheel drive. It biases itself to the rear only when you need the front wheels to engage. Now, I've put on some bigger wheels here, and so one of the things that I want to do here is see what these 22-inch Giovanna rims feel like when you're driving around. So if you get a standard Maserati, it may not be quite the same experience. So factor that in when you're listening to me give my thoughts on this. Now, the first thing we have to do here is step on the brake, and you can see we have the power button right there. I've actually put a little metal cover over that power button. Gives a little more tactile feeling. Fires up here. The infotainment screen always comes on, and I don't know if this ever goes away, but you have to select accept there, which is kind of annoying. Now, one of the things that you might hear is the engine running, and it sounds decent. But if you go down here, you can actually put the sucker into sport mode, and as soon as I hear, or as soon as I touch it, you will probably hear it open up that valve, and it's going to sound a little more straight piped. So not sure how well that's going to come across on video, but that is pretty nice to be able to have that, and it sounds good, especially for a V6. I will say the other thing is that when I shut this off, it never seems to stay in sport mode. Unlike my Grand Sport, when that's in sport mode, it always stays in the mode no matter what you do, unless you toggle it on or off. But this car always starts in non-sport mode, so if you want it, you've got to turn it on. All right, let's back out and try this thing. Now, putting this car into reverse has that kind of wacky Fiat Chrysler Group shifter, and it's one of those that always returns to center, and it has been lampooned and chastised and hated and loathed by many people. It's actually the same shifter, basically. I think it just looks a little different from some of the shifters that came in the Grand Cherokee. Now, if you remember, you probably don't, but I actually did a video called "Is the Jeep Grand Cherokee Shifter Dangerous?" because that gentleman in Hollywood, I can't think of his name right now, actually was crushed by his own Jeep Cherokee when he thought it was in park and it wasn't. And so I said it actually was a little bit dangerous. Now, they have recalled it and changed it a little bit, and so it is a little safer now. If you actually open your door, it will shift the car into park, and so that is a little bit better, I think, than what it did before the reprogramming. Now, this car, I don't know if it'll do it, but I have had it into the shop and had it serviced, and they've done some software updates on occasion. And, you know, I'm usually pretty careful about checking what it indicates on the shifter and on the instrument cluster, and it's always been fine for me. But just out of an abundance of caution, if you get a car like this, or one of the early Chrysler 300s, or one of the Jeep Grand Cherokees, you know, just understand the shifter and be careful and give it a second look every time you get out of it or are getting into it. Now, shifter aside, this car has, I think it's like an 8-speed automatic transmission. There's nothing really interesting about this transmission. It's a good transmission. It should get you decent gas mileage and those types of things, but it is just a standard transmission. Now, on some of these cars, there are paddle shifters behind the steering wheel. Mine does not have that, and I actually liked that. So while it is like $1,000 feature on some cars, it's not a feature I wanted because I would never use paddle shifters on a sedan. I really think of this car as something like a BMW 5 Series, where they can be sporty and they give you a little bit of sporty experience. We're not going to get a lot of that while we're sitting here waiting for the train. But they're not a sports car, and to shift them, I think, you know, can be fun once in a while. But I think for most people, they get in this kind of car and they're going to use it once or twice. Now, someone like Ron on Ron's Ride probably uses it more, but I think for most people, you know, that can afford a car like this and have a need for a back seat and those types of things, you just want to get in it and drive it like any other car and basically be able to use that automatic transmission. So I guess I can tell you about the philosophy of this car. I really like it. I like the fact that you just don't see them that often. I think they did a nice job with the design and the styling on the outside. I don't think it was necessarily a home run. I don't look at the Maseratis and say, man, those are just amazingly gorgeous cars. I know some people do. I will tell you that I look at the Alfa Romeo Giulia and I say, man, that's an amazingly gorgeous car. And I think obviously people's attraction to a particular aesthetic is a little bit determined by their personality and their age and things like that. And I like the Giulia because it looks a little more compact. It looks pretty brawny. It's different than a lot of the other cars out there. It kind of goes for that sporty look in a not sleek way, but kind of a brash way. And so I kind of like that. It kind of reminds me of the old BMW M3s. Now, this car has its sporty look as well, but it's more like the Fisker Karma look. It's more sleek and sits a little lower. In fact, I know that this car is often compared to cars that fit in that sedan coupe category, the Mercedes CLS and the Porsche Panamera. Those cars to me try to look shorter than they are. For me, they really try to hide that rear door. I don't feel like the Ghibli tries to hide that rear door as much. You know, I never looked at it and said, you know, it really kind of looks like an elongated coupe. Just kind of like the Fisker Karma didn't look like a two-door car to me. It looked like a four-door car. I actually think the Aston Martin Rapide does a really good job at a glance of looking like a two-door car, even though it is a four-door car. So this car looks like a four-door car to me. That's basically what I'm saying. And I don't mind that because it doesn't do weird things with the roofline to try to look like a coupe and try to be a sedan, like have a lot of headroom. The Porsche Panamera, while I like them, I always thought the back ends looked goofy. They looked like a large passenger compartment and then kind of a forgotten rear end. You know, the new ones are way better, but they just tried to add too much interior dimension to those rear seats, and that really made the whole look of the car a little bit bulbous. But not to say that they are god-awful ugly, but especially the first generation just had some really weird proportions. Now, when are we going to get to the driving portion of this video? Sure, there's a lot of traffic today. It's early afternoon during the week, and I don't know why there's a bunch of cars on the road. Now, I will say that interior-wise, this car is pretty simple. There's a lot of kind of flat, broad swaths of leather, and it looks good, but it doesn't have that detail, doesn't have that nuance like a Mercedes does, nor even like I would say a Lincoln or some of the other luxury cars. This just doesn't have that kind of detail. It's kind of like someone who knows what high quality materials are like, but hasn't really had a lot of design under their belt. It really screams kind of that FCA, Chrysler, general, kind of mass-produced shapes, but wrapped in premium materials. And so while it's not bad, you certainly don't get into it, I think, and say, wow, this is nice. If you get into a Mercedes S-Class coupe or even into the new Lincoln Aviator or something like that, people will say, wow, this looks and feels really nice. But this car doesn't say that. You know, in fact, one of the things that I've said is that everything in here is wrapped in leather. It's almost surprising because there are places where they had to do stitches and seams like around the starter button because there's certain contours there, which to me you'll never see, but they had to do that because they wrapped everything in leather. Even the bottom of the door panels, when I was replacing those little lights down underneath the door with projectors, I saw that the leather is wrapped up into those little light housings, which is kind of amazing to me how much leather goes in here, because when you look at the leather on the dash, while it looks nice and feels pretty good, I don't think your eye says that this is a premium material over the harder rubbers and synthetic materials that you get on the dashboards of most BMWs or even Porsches. Those look pretty good as well without having to resort to doing a lot of gluing and wrapping of leather. So a little bit of it is lost on me, but that's kind of how I think that they have justified the price point and kind of giving it a premium look without kind of really going into the details. Now, there are some nice details. I like the lights behind the handles. I like how the door handles are integrated with this little brushed chrome strip on the side. I really love the fact that we have an Alcantara headliner as well as pillar covers. That is one of the things that I feel like is an easy upgrade to make for most cars because it looks good and it's right in your line of sight. And so really cheap headliners, no matter what's going on down here, you know, below your shoulders, you know, is something that you see, feel, and touch. And it's one of those really easy things. I don't know that 40 square feet of Alcantara is super expensive, and so I think you get a lot of bang for the upgrade on those. Now, I will say, I have the 22-inch rims on here, torqued them down to spec. They are big wheels, and so far, the ride quality on this road, which is a fine suburban road, there aren't any major potholes or undulations in it, seems to be riding fine. In fact, I kind of lost track here because this is really my first ride on these new rims, and I was expecting a lot of harshness, maybe some additional movement in the steering wheel, you know, because you're going to be more moved around by the ruts in the road and things like that. But so far, from going from the 18-inch wheels to the 22-inch wheels, I haven't experienced anything that screams that I've changed wheels. Now, there might be just a little bit more precision in the steering wheel here as I do that, but really from my perspective and where I was really worried about it is that it was just going to be kind of a harsh ride and you're going to maybe improve the looks. I know that's going to be controversial. Some people won't agree with me. Some people wouldn't have gone to this size wheel. Some people wouldn't have gone to a wheel quite this flashy either, but I say you only live once. Why not? So I did, and I really like them, man. You know, I know, actually, I was talking to a wheel guy, and he was saying don't go to 22 inches because you just have to worry so much about the road, and you're always going to be consumed by that. And I would say that right now, it's not bad. Now, the closer you get to the city or the higher trafficked areas, in many cases, the roads get worse. And so if you're going to live in a place where the roads are in pretty bad condition, you know, I grew up in Michigan and the roads were always in bad condition, then that might be something to consider. And I did think about going to 20 inches, but the 22s are pretty nice so far. I promise you, we will find a place to open this car up a little bit. All right, taking turns on these large wheels. That doesn't seem to be a problem either. Like I said, I've got the car in sport mode, and so I'm getting definitely more noise in the car than you would when you are driving not in sport mode. And I actually took this car on a little road trip, about an hour and a half road trip, and I would say that if you're going to be in the car for a while, it's just easier to go off sport mode. The transmission shifts very softly, the ride is nice and quiet, and you don't get really the droning sound of the exhaust. And so when you have it in sport mode, you'll get some of that. Now, I won't say it's bad, and in some ways, I would love the sport mode to be on when you actually turn the car on, if you wanted that sport mode on all the time, because it sounds awesome. And especially for someone who isn't expecting a mid-size sedan to sound great, it's kind of one of those things that's pretty cool when you fire it up. Now, I will say, even when you fire this car up on normal mode, it still sounds actually pretty good. All right, looks like we've got maybe an open road here. Let's see if we can give it a little stick. Yeah, baby. This car is pretty fast. I think it'll do 0 to 60 in the 4s. I think it might be high 4s, but it's kind of funny because this car actually puts out more power and is faster to 60 than my Grand Sport, which is more of a dedicated sports car. It's closer to a sports car than this car, but it just kind of shows how far technology has come, you know, with 2 fewer cylinders and a bigger car, bigger dimensions, heavier car, you know, how much that technology can help. 4-wheel drive, I'm sure, helps that too. If you end up breaking the rear tires loose, it's always better for acceleration to have all 4 wheels putting power to the ground, but the thing moves pretty good and sounds pretty good too. I believe this car has dual pane glass with a lamination sheet in between, and so I would say that the isolation from the wind and noise is pretty good. We are getting a little bit of translation of the road through these tires and wheels, more so than I was getting on the 18-inch wheels. But like I said, it's really nice to know that if you need to stick it, you can pass cars on the highway, you can have a little fun on the back roads, and it's a pretty good compromise overall for speed and enjoyment and utility. So I like it. You know, I know Doug DeMuro shat all over the Ghiblis as well, but he made a point that in the mid-30s, this car is actually a fairly good value, and I would tend to agree with that because you get a lot of motor for it. You get a nice car. Like I said, it's not exactly the most luxurious car ever, but it is a luxury car, or I'd call it a near luxury car. If you consider Buicks as a near luxury car and a Mercedes as a luxury car, I definitely think this is somewhere in kind of that middle level, maybe the BMW level, but it just tends to be a little more driver focused. It's got the standard Chrysler stuff, so it works. It may not be overly elegant, but it's nice and reliable. And so far, other than having a trip to the dealership to unstick one of my AC actuators, which was about 2.5 hours of work, so I was in and out, this car has been pretty problem-free, and I hope that it stays that way. Because like I said, at the $30,000 or even $35,000 range, I'm not sure what else you can get that has the presence of this car, that has kind of that exclusivity and uniqueness that a lot of people are looking for, the power, and I think that it's kind of heresy to say that the Maserati might be good value. So I think if you really want something and you're going to have one car and you can't have every car for every unique situation, Gran Turismo, sports car, utility car, family sedan, those types of things, this is a great way to have it. And if you think about the cars, I think that you would get new in this price range, where it would be, you know, a fairly well-equipped Camry or the Avalon, the Nissan, you know, Maxima, or, you know, the Honda Accord, or even I'd say the Chrysler 300 and some of those cars. You could spend more on those. I know people who have spent easily 40s on Honda Odysseys and Chrysler Pacificas. So, yeah, it might just be a good deal. We might be able to sell a bunch of these things, even though they have panel gaps large enough to store toothpaste in. So yeah, new. I'm not a big fan of buying new cars, period, because they tend to depreciate so quickly in the first couple of years that I like getting cars that are nearly new, and really that big early drop-off in depreciation has already been borne by the new owners. But in the Maserati's cases, you know, if you wait 2 years, 3 years, I mean, you can get a car that is 40, 50, maybe even 60% off the retail price. So I'm not sure exactly who's buying them new. People who have more money than they need, for sure. But if you're looking at one of these cars, getting something that's nearly new is a great way to go. Surprisingly good value. Anyway, I really like this car. Unfortunately, couldn't find more open roads to kind of open her up, but she seems to drive just fine, even on aftermarket wheels. Hey, if you want to pick up these Giovanna Dallara X's, I will put a link to them in the description below. And if you want to pick up that key cover for your remote key for Maserati, it's actually the best one I've found so far. I'll put a link to that as well. Stay tuned for more. Peter von Panda, out. Woohoo! She got up to the speed limit pretty quick.